Thank you, and once again here we are with the book, and this program is for those who love the book or are interested in the book or want to read the book or want to study the book, but especially for those who begin an obligation to teach the book to somebody. And our lesson today is found in the book of Acts, chapter 8, a very interesting lesson about baptism, a very interesting one, and a passage that proves conclusively that the book of Acts is a book where you're traversing and coming across a period where your doctrine is changing. It's progressive. As we've talked to you many times in these programs, many times, since 1960, the books of Matthew and Acts and Hebrews are transit books. And that's why if a man gets messed up in his theology, he'll get messed up in Acts or Matthew or Hebrews. In the book of Matthew, you're coming from the Old Testament to the New Testament. There's a complete change in a dozen doctrines, including the ability to eat fish that doesn't have fins and scales, like catfish and scallops and raw lobsters and crabs. It changes. And when you're coming from the book of Matthew to the book of Acts, you're going from the Jew to the Gentile. The Lord was sent first to Israel, and he came to his own, and his own received him not. In the book of Acts, the Gentiles receive him. Now, you see that, how clear that is? And with all that clarity, you get all kinds of rotten preaching today and rotten application. I guess two of the biggest ones are the fellow saying there's only one gospel, and that's getting rid of 3/4 of the Bible. There's only one gospel that Paul said was to be preached in this age. But if you think that Bible is just written for your benefit in this age, it shows you're pretty conceited. You got a real ego going there. That book is written for, in the main, to people who were born and died many centuries before your grandmother was born. And much of it is to a 1,000-year period when the Lord comes back, which is not the church age at all. I heard a preacher the other day on the radio said there's only one gospel. Well, you lied like a dog. You're 75% off. There are 4 of them. If that weren't enough, there are 4 different ones that are written. That's 8. That is if you are a Bible student. Now, if you're just a dummy trying to make a living messing around with a book, that's something else. But there's a gospel by Matthew that doesn't match Mark, and Mark doesn't match all the way Luke, and Luke doesn't match John, and Matthew doesn't match John. There are 4 written gospels that differ in context, but that isn't the worst of it. The worst of it is when Paul said, though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel than that which he preached, which is defined in 1 Corinthians 15 as the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ for sinners. And he said, if any man preach any other gospel than that one, and that's the one we all think is the gospel, why then let God curse him. Though we, an angel from heaven, preach any other gospel, let God curse him. Well, an angel does, and he preaches from heaven. It's not Paul's gospel, and God doesn't curse him. Now, who doesn't know that that's read the Bible? About 15,000 preachers. Did you ever hear of the everlasting gospel? It's in Revelation chapter 14. Every edition of the King James Bible that's ever come out in 400 years. How come you don't know that? That isn't the gospel Paul preached, and it's preached by an angel, and he's not cursed. Now, that's the problem you get to when you get to these amateur preachers who think they know something about the book. The gospel preached to Abraham wasn't the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ at all. You can't find God telling Abraham one single thing about anybody dying for anybody's sins and being buried and coming again. Not a word. But it's called the gospel in Galatians. Look it up. Now, there's a couple out of line right there. And there's another one. You're told in the book of Hebrews, that's where to break your neck. When you take the book of Hebrews up, you find that the gospel was preached to the spies at Kadesh Barnea. And they didn't believe it, so they couldn't get into the promised land. It had nothing to do with the death of any Savior, or payment for sin or anything, and it's called the gospel. How'd you miss it? Well, you 20,000 preachers missed it, and said there's only one gospel. You're sick in the head, buddy. But you have to talk nice to you fellows. Now, that's a whole other bunch out. I heard a preacher the other day saying that you need to be like Christ. And if people see that you're not like Christ, they wouldn't be interested. Wouldn't think you had religion either unless you were like Christ. You mean telling people they're going to hell? He told them you're in danger of hellfire. You mean telling people they're fools? He said, "O fools and slow of heart not to believe all the prophets have spoken." You mean damning people? He said, "Depart from me, cursed and everlasting fire." Is that the way you want to talk? No, these nuts, they think if you're just nice and sweet and kind, that God will be good to you. You know how they do it? They take the promises given to the child of God, the Pauline epistles, and apply it to unsaved people. You can pick a preacher to handle that way 5 times a day, 365 days a year. They're going through there and taking a verse like, "My God shall supply your need," and putting that to a fellow for salvation. That's not for anybody who's unsaved. That's a promise given to a Christian in Philippians 4, a Pauline epistle. I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. No, you can't if you don't have him. See that thing? You've got a whole nation of apostate Laodiceans that think if you're cute and nice and sweet and generous and apply the promises to God's people to unsaved people, that they'll get saved because you're such a nice, sweet fellow. You know what they are? They're gutless politicians out for votes. Check them out.